might not think about this every day, but I do think it's important to kind of acknowledge that it's a crowded space. We are at the end of the day, we are competing with other voices on whatever platform you're on, right? Whether it's email marketing, social, TV, there's a lot of noise. And so I think in terms of just like breaking through that noise, I think what's going to work hardest for B2B or B2C marketers is like knowing how to speak to your community.
Welcome to Agents of Change, a podcast about the future of B2B marketing featuring insights from executives at top agencies. I'm Danielle O'Neill with Leadtail. Let's hop on in. Welcome to Agents of Change. This is Danielle, and I'm super excited to have with us today Gabriel Gomez. He is the account supervisor over at Edelman. He does a lot of work when it comes to working with the communities, helping their clients and their accounts find new ways to reach their audiences, find their voices, and experiment on new ideas. So we're so thrilled to have you on today, Gabe.
Hi, Danielle. Yeah, I am just as excited to be here.
All right, Gabe. So let's just dig right in, shall we? So I know that your main focus is really on B2C consumers, and us here at Leadtail, we're really focused on B2B. But as we've kind of talked about, and let's be honest, these lines are getting really blurred right now. There's a lot of crossover, and it's not this clear division as it usually has been in the past, and what we all kind of learned back in Marketing 101 way back in the days when I was in college. So, in your opinion, is there a significant difference now between what we're seeing with B2B and B2C audiences? And what do you think that is?
Yeah. No, I think, I remember that initial conversation we had, Danielle, and it was so interesting because, first of all, it's like how often in your day to day do you get to talk to other marketers, right? Like the B2B versus B2C marketers aren't always in each other's universes. So it's great to just have that initial conversation together. But I think, in terms of audience crossover, and I don't, not to oversimplify what we do, but at the end of the day, social media has like just kind of helped humanize the channels in which we speak to each other, right? Like I think if you think back to 10 years ago, we didn't have the same kind of day-to-day contact we do with some of our consumers, whether it's like from a B2B perspective who you're speaking to or a B2C perspective. It was channels maybe much more formalized. I'm thinking TV, the newspaper, etc. But I think with social, it's kind of grayed the spaces a little bit in terms of who we're talking to and what that crossover is, right? B2B marketing tactics like might be reaching other consumers or other businesses that they might not have in the past. And it's because social has really grayed the space a little bit in that capacity. So I think we're going to kind of continue to see that actually as like the markets continue, like in 5 years or 10 years from now, I think we'll continue to see the gray become grayer, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, and you can weigh on this a little bit, but I feel like marketers, especially B2B, we might be missing out on these audiences if we're not refining our strategies and thinking more along the lines of B2C marketing. Like what have you seen and what's your input on that?
Yeah. I think, it's so interesting how you could be just browsing on social, the way the ranking works nowadays. I sometimes on a TikTok, I'll jump from a food recipe that's really clearly like a more B2C to then the very next second get served a kind of more B2B, like here is the best platform to brief your creative studio, for example. And that will be really geared and but the content feels like it's geared to almost like the everyday consumer, so to speak, because it feels so down to earth. It doesn't feel overcomplicated. It honestly still feels like a B2C marketing campaign in many ways, but it's very clearly geared to a B2B audience. And so I think that could be something that B2B marketers like kind of embrace a little more, like play outside of the box. And what happens if your ads don't feel as much like ads, or if your ads kind of have a more human touch to them, because at the end of the day you're still talking to a person on the other side of the screen.
Bringing humanity back to B2B.
Bringing humanity back to B2B, exactly.
And that's such key. And it's so funny because it's something that in B2B marketing, I mean, gosh, when I first started doing this 15 years ago, it was all about be human, be authentic. And then that seemed to go away because we all needed to focus on our buyers so much and focus on their personas. And it took a different approach that now it's fun that we're getting back to this humanity, back to this connection side. And here at Leadtail, for instance, we often say if you want to see where B2B marketing is going a few years from now, just look at what B2C marketers are doing right now. So, what is one approach that you would say that B2B marketers should be taking and embracing that we're learning from our B2C counterparts?
Yeah, I think aside from that human touch from a content perspective, I think there's something to say about where you're reaching your audience and the how you're reaching your audience, right? I remember we talked a little bit about like what happens if B2B shows up on Reddit, and what happens if you start to foster community on Reddit and have the work do itself in a way, right? Like when you have a community of folks who are passionate about a product, whether it's B2C, whether it's B2C product or a B2B product or offering, they kind of start to do the legwork for you. And so you get, could it be like in 5 years from now, you have a Reddit dedicated to X market that are all these brand advocates who are talking about your offering organically and bringing that humanity back, but also expanding you're reaching your prospects potentially, right? For folks who are like, oh, I'm interested in maybe this product, but don't know a lot about it, is one thing that you're kind of gaining. But you're also talking to existing brand fans who are like deep in the community, who have been with the Reddit since day one, and are really talking to each other and continuing the conversation on that platform where y'all might have not have been originally.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting point and something that we all need to embrace no matter which side of the marketing spectrum we're on, is touching that community, finding that community, and then truly finding those organic ways to kind of bring them into conversation. And B2C has been so good at doing this. So Gabe, I have a question for you. So do you think that B2B marketers that we're missing out on audiences by not refining our strategies, by not looking at more of these methods that have more things in common when it comes to B2C marketing and the channels and the ways in which we're adapting?
I think it's like, yeah, it is that like more two-way conversation. Listen, I feel like any marketer might not think about this every day, but I do think it's important to kind of acknowledge that it's a crowded space. We are at the end of the day, we are competing with other voices on whatever platform you're on, right? Whether it's email marketing, social, TV, there's a lot of noise. And so I think in terms of just like breaking through that noise, I think what's going to work hardest for B2B or B2C marketers is like knowing how to speak to your community and knowing and like speaking in their language, right? Essentially, like if you know your community is really passionate about these two specific passion points or territories, like infuse that into your everyday messaging, because that's how you're going to kind of break through the noise a little bit and really dig into the audience that you're going after.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that kind of brings us to our next discussion point, something that you had mentioned on an earlier conversation. And I love this perspective. At the end of the day, we're all still selling to people. No matter if we're selling home goods or we're selling the next SaaS product, it's people that's making that final decision. And that's what we have to remember. And those are the people we need to have conversations with. So, how can we as B2B marketers make this messaging and our tactics feel more human? How can we embrace that and really start to engage these customers?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think you know you correct me, like as our B2B expert on the call. Like I think having a feedback loop could be really pivotal in kind of in taking what's working and what's not. I think when you start to develop a community from B2B perspective, you see the good and the opportunities, right? You'll start to see from like a SaaS product, for example, like this is one component from this product that's working really well, but then you also see like what's not working well, which isn't a bad, in my eyes, like isn't a bad thing. I think like that's actually what you want to hear from your community. And I think that's also kind of going to be the new norm, right? Like in many industries, the sharing of opinions on social media is just like what happens and what we see on the platform. So I think like keep an open eyes and ears into what your consumers are saying, because I think at the end of the day, that feedback loop is so important, right? Like, let's take the opportunities, let's take the potential negative one or two things we've seen here in this campaign and improve it for the next go round.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so, thinking about that and knowing that we've got these different methods and ways that we want to engage them, what are some other ideas perhaps that we need to take to this B2B landscape to start to truly engage with our customers in a way that almost mimics what you've been able to do on the B2C side?
Yeah, I think, there are tons of things you can do. I think it depends on kind of the scale of the business you're working with, right? I think some B2B marketers will have more resources to play with, while others like kind of have to start at ground zero. But I think, to start at ground zero, that means starting with the research and kind of starting to identify the tools that you all have at your disposal and the resources you have at your disposal, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're working with an X amount of budget, you're gonna have to really take a beat and say, okay, how can we expand? Like, what's feasible for us to expand on? And that could mean something as simple as like starting a new social media account on a platform you've never been before, right? That effectively costs $0, and dedicate a few folks to your team or a few hours of the day to your team and start testing and start learning. I think like that's a great way for any B2B marketer to get started on any new tactic, whether it's building a community, building a net new kind of content approach. Just start to do the work, because if you wait for the right budget, maybe in 2 years' time, that new platform you want to start to dig into won't be there anymore, right? Or like won't be as relevant. So I think what from a B2C perspective, sometimes we honestly just go and we kind of build the plane while we fly it, and sometimes it works really well, and we end up learning a lot from that, and then we can take that to our kind of next approach and say, hey, we know this worked really well, we know our community is going to react well to XYZ, so let's take that and build onto it. And I think BB marketers can replicate that process.
And I love the idea of starting on a platform that you haven't previously engaged in. B2B, we tend to be so focused and so siloed on LinkedIn. And this is where all of our buyers are, and we need to spend time. And what we're learning as the buyer landscape continues to change, that's not always the case. And so we need to start to open up our horizons to start to think about these different platforms. I know you've done some really cool things on TikTok, and one of the things that we're starting to see is that there is this trend of B2B starting to take over TikTok, where they're coming and they're having these conversations and almost embracing that fun side. So for the marketers that are trying to figure out, how do I get my SaaS product to be fun on TikTok and make it engaging so that I at least get some views on this? Do you have any ideas or tactics that you would share with these marketers that are like, let's just try it, let's see what happens?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. And it's funny, you mentioned LinkedIn, because yeah, a lot of us are LinkedIn, whether you're B2C or B2B, right? Understand your focus is B2B, and expanding can kind of be scary sometimes. You've never been on this platform. Also, I think it's important, you mentioned that folks are B2B folks are starting to enter TikTok. You're starting to see more B2B comms and more B2B content on this platform. But that can be really scary for folks who haven't started, because the first thing that comes to mind is like, how are the people going to react? Are people going to care? And I think that all ladders back up to what you mentioned. How do we make our content human enough and compelling enough to actually make a splash on this platform? And I'd say, some tips and tricks are listen to what folks are already saying. TikTok is effectively a search engine, and people use it more as a search engine than Google nowadays. So honestly, type in SaaS and see what conversations people are having, and then see, okay, is there a white space for our market to kind of dive into from a content perspective and talk about something that's not being talked about. And or you can also say, we can have this SaaS conversation better than the current conversation, or there's a culture we can build here. let's start to make content around that culture. I think you can really listen to what's happening and react to that. And that could be a good North Star for some B2B marketers who are dipping their toes into like a TikTok, for example.
I love that. I love that. And then when we're thinking about the shareholders, we as the marketers may have the idea of, let's go to TikTok. Here's where our strategy is going to be. Here's our KPIs that we're going to be measuring based on this. And here's the campaigns that we can include in this vision. But we also know when we take it to the shareholders, when we take it to our client contacts, when they take it to their CMOs or whomever else it might be, they may not have that buy-in. They may say, nope, that's not our space and that's not where we belong. Is there any thoughts that you have as to ways that maybe we can get around those no's and those naysayers to just say, at least let us try this?
That is tough because yeah, you're right. As marketers, we all sort of all deal with that. Whether you're B2C marketer or B2B marketer, like you, before you do the selling online, you've got to do the selling internally. And I think my advice or what comes to mind in these conversations is like do the due diligence of assessing the landscape. I think is the number one thing you can do. I think it's great to say with some proof points like, hey, TikTok is a growing market for our demographic and for the people we're trying to reach. We are effectively missing out on this whole audience pool. And I'll keep using TikTok as an example, but TikTok has great potential for organic growth. So you're not necessarily having to pay, like if it's a budget conscious conversation, you don't necessarily have to pay those paid media dollars or production dollars to make a commercial or hire a creator necessarily. The content can be really low fidelity and not cost that much more money if that is really what the conversation is about, while still reaching a demographic in a cost effective way, while testing and learning, because at the end of the day you want to still evolve as a business, right? Because I think if you're not thinking about the business of tomorrow, where are you going to be? You're going to lose out to some competitors who may already be on the platform or who are thinking of expanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you threw in the cost part there because that, as we all know, is going to be a big factor for our clients and for the organizations that we're working with is what is this going to cost me? And so being able to say, nothing, we have the videos, we have this opportunity, let's try it, let's put it out and see what happens. I think that will help move that needle a
Exactly.
little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Danielle. Like, hey, we have these existing things that might work. We don't even have to make anything new. That is something that's a great practice that, and from a B2C perspective, we're always trying to sweat our assets, quote unquote. And I think you can do the same thing in B2B. And it doesn't hurt to try. I think that's something a lot of folks on LinkedIn talk about too, is the whole kind of, you're not losing out. Nothing bad is going to happen if you post a video and it only gets 500 views. Try again tomorrow, or revisit the strategy and see how you can improve on that.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. So now that we've kind of covered all of the things that we like that B2C is doing and that we should be mimicking on the B2B marketing side, what's something in B2C that you'd actually like to see go away?
Ooh, that is a great question. Something,
I like to give you the hard ones every once in a while, Gabe.
yeah, no, you gotta ask the hard questions. I think something to go away in B2C land, I'd have to say is, gosh, if they could stop making new social platforms, that could be great.
Amen.
Because
I will echo that. We have enough. We don't need more.
just for a little bit, like
Okay.
you know what I mean. Like, give us the year to figure out everything we've got going on right now, and then we can get rolling and start to do new things again. And I also think, honestly, I think to our point later, I think B2C marketers could also give ourselves a little slack too, and be okay with the failures, right? I think, like, from a B2C perspective, our marketers in general, we're really hard on ourselves, and we want I think, and to a lot of ways we're all striving to be perfectionists. Um, this is missing a comma, or oh no, this post went up wrong, or no, this comms like went out an hour later than it should, which happens, of course. But I do think we could all give ourselves a break. Like we are um, all working around the clock, and this industry, like you never really turn off. And so with the reality of that, I think any kind of slack we can give ourselves as marketers would probably go a long way.
That reminds me of something that you'd posted the other day with the like mummified baby of
Oh yeah,
saying, marketers getting ready for a 3-day weekend,
yeah,
and usually have to have our hands tied down to
yeah.
not work on a 3-day weekend. So is there something that you're working on right now that you're really excited about?
Yes, I actually, there is in terms of our conversation around kind of diversifying the B2B channel mix, I am working on a webinar to also talk about diversifying just the channel mix for any marketer and how that process looks like. And that's something I'm very excited that I'm kind of working towards. It's going to be broadcasted to, webinar is going to be broadcasted to other marketers in attendance. So it's really like getting down and dirty, and it's the very similar conversation that we just had, Danielle, in terms of how do you diversify channel mix? Where do you start? I think it's easy to go into a meeting and be like, let's be on TikTok, or let's be on X, or let's be on Clubhouse. Anyone can get excited and say that, but then when you sit down with it all and you're like, wait, how are we going to do this? Or like, what did we say in that meeting that we said we were going to do for next quarter? So really what I'm working on is a diversifying your channel mix roadmap, and being able to hand that roadmap to a B2B marketer or a B2C marketer and have them follow that roadmap and say, okay, here is a checklist of things we have to do and our due diligence of how we can most effectively show up on this platform with a budget of $0 or with a budget of X dollars. So that's something I'm really excited about, because I think it's something that'll just kind of help the community of marketers and hopefully also encourage some more dialogue in terms of, oh yeah, like we should diversify our channel mix. We haven't been in a new place in 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a key, regardless of if we're talking B2B, B2C, is thinking about what that channel mix looks like and also using those channels appropriately. It goes back to in our earlier conversation. I know we were talking about the copy and paste that we tend to see across channels for so many of our brands, and it doesn't work. What you're saying on LinkedIn doesn't necessarily always work for Facebook and vice versa. So it's interesting to think about if you start adding more channels, it is going to give you a little bit more work because you have to figure out how to use those channels, but you also have greater opportunity to get more creative with the channels and the messaging that you're going to say.
Exactly. And I'll say too, I think, in our industry as marketers, I think we're always eager to see the results as quickly as we want the work to be done. That's just as quickly we want the results to kind of trickle in. I think too, what we have to remember from a B2C or a B2B perspective is that social can sometimes feel like a long game, and in many ways it is. So I also don't want folks to get discouraged and say, oh, dang, we've been trying this new platform or this new messaging mix or this new approach for a month and we haven't really seen the results we wanted. I think that's okay. I think as long as you're constantly evolving your approach and again, testing and learning, give yourself the year or make a roadmap or make a crawl, walk, run. For the first 3 months, we're going to do 2 posts a week. And then once you get into the groove, we'll do 5 and then 10. And then I think you'll start to see a halo effect. But yeah, it's easy to get discouraged, but I think I'd love to like make sure we're all kind of giving ourselves that grace and saying like, okay, this is a long game. I don't have to grow 1 million followers. I don't have to convert 1,000 people in this one post overnight.
Yes, absolutely. Reminder, you are not Mark Cuban. You're not going to have his same followers. And it's okay that you don't.
Exactly.
And I think that's really important for us to remember as marketers too. We all know that social media is not the silver bullet. I mean, how many times have we all heard that throughout our careers, and how many times have we had to remind people of that? But we also have to remind ourselves that social media is also not fast. It is very much that crawl, walk, run when we're thinking about strategies and campaigns, particularly when we're launching a new channel. And your point is spot on. Give yourself some grace, but also make sure that your clients understand this and that you're conveying that message to them appropriately so that they have a realistic expectation of what that timeline looks like too.
Exactly, exactly. And I think too, in these conversations, there's a lot of conversations around the innovation from a social media perspective and what that means. And I think too, it's great that B2B marketers are embracing some of these B2C core practices or B2C kind of perspectives, because I think in many ways the traditional website is now kind of becoming your Instagram or your LinkedIn or your TikTok, right? Like I can't count the amount of times where if I want to do research on a B2B product or B2C product, I tend to actually go to their social channels first as like a judge of character. Like I know, like don't read a book by its cover, but like also kind of do. And the book I'm reading is your LinkedIn or is your TikTok or is your Instagram.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Gosh, Gabe, I feel like we could like spend hours talking and just continue to have so many nuggets to drop. But I also know that we are coming up on time. So just want to thank you very much for joining us today. Great conversation as always. So excited to have you as a guest. So excited to share this conversation with you.
Of course, yes. Thank you for having me, and to the B2B folks who are exploring how to innovate, I think keep an open eyes, keep an open ears, and don't be afraid to try new things is
Mhm.
really a great mindset. I think you can try to adopt.
Key lesson, don't be afraid to try new things.